It's Financial Tuesdays, and we want to have a conversation. Last week, we had an interesting conversation with Karo Musyoka. She calls herself the
governance provocateur.
What governance though? Corporate governance provocateur. And she was talking to us about the importance of having a proper board, a proper advisory, proper checks and balances in your organization. As we continue talking about, financial matters in these Financial Tuesdays, you're here because we want to talk about building sellable businesses.
Yes.
As we had a conversation with Carol last week, there was that whole issue of, so why are you in business? Once the business starts to thrive, what next for the business? Once you get to a point where you feel that you'd like to take a back seat, then how does the business continue for you and make sense to you? Now, you're talking about building sellable businesses, not products.
Yes,
but businesses.
Businesses.
Why? Why would you want to build a sellable business?
I think first and foremost because it doesn't have to have the option. We are transitioning as an economy. Our parents or our grandparents who were in business were not building businesses to exit. They were building them, hopefully, for their kin to take over, or their kids. But things are changing, and those kids do not necessarily want to continue in the line that the parents set up the business. And if you build something that's sellable, it gives you options to sell it, and take that capital elsewhere and allocate it to other things. Maybe you want to become an investor and you unlock that capital and have the cash in your pocket to do other things or to put in other areas that maybe are less hectic than running a day-to-day business, rather than not having the option because you have maybe not structured it right. Because we don't have a shortage of examples in the local landscape of fabulous businesses that grew to be quite large, only to collapse at the finish line because of some things that were probably not done right. I think Caro, who is a board whisperer, spoke about it last week. But you get to a stage where you cannot you erode a lot of value because you did not build something that you could sell.
So then, what would be the makeup or the infrastructure of a business that then was sellable? If it's making money today, does then that guarantee that it's sellable? What are the elements that make up a sellable business that you should then say, okay, fine, if this is something that I can either chop up and sell later or sell it in its entirety, what are certain things that it must have?
Businesses, in their very basic nature, are a collection of systems and processes. Sometimes those systems and processes are embedded in a person. Even a kiosk has its systems and processes. When you go there's some way you order, there's some way the kiosk owner orders their goods, sells them, and accounts for the money thereafter. The bigger they get, the more important it is to structure those systems and processes in a way that is devoid of the individual. Sometimes the system and process is embedded in the person. And I think that's where I would say we should start, in the sense that how do you take these processes and improve on them and move them away from being around you as the individual and becoming independent. Take an example of, I think one of the best examples I have is Coca-Cola. When you drive around the country, even this country, I've been up north to a place called Leonard. I don't know if you've been there. It's 30 kilometers from the Ethiopian border, up north. And in Leonard, you can get an ice cold Coke. Now, Coke is headquartered in Atlanta. Yet there's some systems and processes in this Atlanta-based company that have been set that in the back of beyond of Kenya, up north completely, you can get a nice cold Coke. I mean, when you think about what goes into that system and structure to enable you to do that, it is actually quite phenomenal. And that's what we're talking about. How do you processes in your business to help them outlive you? because ultimately you want to sit down and say, okay, I was part of that thing. It's now 100 years old, or my great grandfather started that company. He doesn't own it today, but it's still up and running. And I think Africa and East Africa is at that stage where we need to start thinking about this, so that we start embedding our own brands into our ecosystem. Nothing against international brands. They are welcome to come, but they can compete on a playing field where they find the presence of African brands growing and developing.
You know what you're saying seems to be you want people to move from and into, meaning someone starts a business, they have started the business, them.
Yes.
And you want them to remove themselves and their being and everything that goes with it from this business and make it something inanimate which can function without them. And yet, as far as they are concerned, they are the business. Because when you start something, by and large, it becomes an extension of you.
Agreed. I don't think, yes, I would say yes and no to your statement that you've just made. Because one, you have to acknowledge that if your business is growing, it has to be about more than yourself. Because you do not have the skill sets to as this beast emerges, it needs to, you'll need other skill sets other than the ones you have.
See, you've leapfrogged.
Yes.
Because that is what is desired.
Yes.
I'm still stuck at I, me, myself, and I, and the business, which is actually me. And the success accrued thereof is also an extension of me into this next realm. Because an expert, yes, one can look for, but one who chimes with my rhyme. Okay?
Yes.
Why I'm emphasizing this is,
yes,
I am saying the growth we speak of in the next plateau that we want to reach cannot be reached if we cannot resolve this. How do you get people to remove themselves from being the business? Because they may even employ people
completely emotionally attached
exactly.
to the business.
They may even do this, but it's it's still them.
Even
Yes.
the CEO must really see
Surely,
it.
yes. Even the board, it has to be of my choice and choosing. How do you get them to get to that point?
I think the easiest way to get them to that point is to package it from the perspective of the opportunity. Because these are business people. They are out to make a return on whatever it is they're building and growing, and showing them how they can do so more and better by building this structure. I think last week I was listening to your show with Carol, and she was speaking to how she starts out businesses with an advisory board, not a statutory one, because the advisory board gives the entrepreneur or the owner of the business, as you rightly put it, the chance to listen and see if he gets value out of this advice, and he can take it or ignore it depending on what he sees fit. And in that, he'll find a balance, or he or she will find a balance of what it is they're trying to create, and reach to a space, get into a space where they're happy with what they have put together. Of course, like all things in life, a lot easier said than done.
Indeed.
But it is a process, and you do have examples of several success stories, both locals and also stories of those that you wish did but didn't and now don't exist anymore.
True. I mean, you mentioned Coca-Cola. The person who came up with the concoction and the chemical mix that gave us the drink was bought out.
Yes.
Yes, and it continued. So you see, I'm thinking if they had been the one who now had brought in people to run the business, would we still have Coca-Cola as we know it? Would it even have gotten to where we know it?
I guess that's one of those questions which we can all speculate about but can't really answer, because he did sell. But also interesting to piggyback on that example of the person who sold. It would be interesting to see what he went on to do.
What else he
Yeah,
went to
because he was an inventor. He invented this. He unlocked value for it by selling it. What did this extra wealth and capital that he unlocked from this asset that he had developed, what did it give him the bandwidth to do because of the flexibility that he now had of having those few coins in his pocket?
You see, the model that comes to mind when we're thinking of that is something on a much grander scale.
Yep.
But it's the model that one sees, say, for instance, Southeast Asia, one sees in China, one sees in Japan, where you have a government that directly gets involved in business. Okay? So that business and how it thrives has the sort of backing that more or less extinguishes the possibility of failure.
Yes.
Unless that particular government collapses. Okay? Now, bring it down to a micro level where you're talking about an investor, whether it's an institution or individual, and the business, okay? And the role they play beyond waiting to eke a profit from it.
Yes.
And how it is that if that investor is as informed about the things that you're saying and how that would play into ensuring that this business actually thrives beyond the individuals who started it.
Yes.
Yes. Now, my question, would we then say that, for instance, when we talk about venture capitalists and the people who want to start startups and bring new business, do you think that they play this role? And if they do they play it well? Let's say, for instance, in a setup like ours, in understanding the ecosystem within which this particular business can actually exist.
They do, but I think what you've touched on with regards to venture capital is the basis of the conversation we're having today. Because they will have certain irreducible minimums. If we were to take the conversation from
Kalpa.
that is ongoing. So they would have certain irreducible minimums in what it would take for them to put money into your business. And I think that's where I am. If you don't have them, because the transactions are happening in the local market, capital will find a place. So people have come. We have seen we were a market that was starved of options of where to get capital to either grow, develop your business. That's not the case now. There are several options. But we have way more transactions failing than closing because of the lack of the structures that will make your business sellable.
So this is what they're looking for, and
Yes.
they're not finding
Yes.
in the very many businesses that they are dealing with here.
Despite having identified the opportunity, having the money, and then coming into the market and saying, now, here I am with my X million dollars, euros, Kenya shillings, whatever currency you've come with. I'm now looking for a small to medium-sized player in the retail sector in Kenya, and my aim is to grow them to a bigger player in 5 to 7 years or in 10 years. And so I say due diligence process, I go through commercial due diligence tick. The business is there, it's selling, it has potential to grow. Legal due diligence, there's some labor issues here, some contracts that are done, some people who have been paid below minimum wage and so on. That's a question mark. And then, of course, tax due diligence, you know. I think we sometimes ignore the fact that we have to accept who we are and where we come from. We are in a country where it was not this adherence to the tax code and diligent paying of taxes is a new phenomenon in Kenya. You know, it's 25 years where Kenyan businesses started seeing value, you know, in paying their taxes because they were getting the services from the government that they expected. But go back 20, 30, 40 years. And yeah, there was a bit of cooking of the books, and maybe if I'll do what I can, or I'll do what I can get away with. Yeah. And now we're in this environment where there are multiple sources of capital. And it's a shame that we are missing out on them because we maybe are stuck in a mindset where we should still cook the books. I know I have personal experience of a rather interesting transaction that collapsed at the 11th hour
Because
of tax. You know,
What about tax?
we have agreed on price. Which is the most difficult thing. Anyone who's bought or sold something is
Stuck on
going to
price.
tell you that the toughest thing is evaluation, because you're two people at polar opposites. One is trying to get the highest price possible, and one is trying to get the lowest price possible.
Yeah.
So we've done all that. Yeah. And we get to literally the finish line, and it says, there's some tax issues here, and the tax issues cannot be, we cannot fix them. And as a result, the deal fell apart.
You mean there are
Several $1 million.
there are some tax issues that cannot be fixed?
Yes, there are
So
some tax.
carelessness.
There are some tax issues that I guess all tax issues can be fixed. Yeah. Now, the question is, if you as the buyer want to take the headache of fixing them, or the price. So first thing you'll do in cases like that, the deal usually is not dead, but you go back and say to the seller, okay, I've found this tax problem.
Fix them.
Yeah. Either fix them or discount the price that we had agreed on to the maximum value of the potential tax liability. And then you say, then that's usually where
You
things
get
fall
stuck.
apart. Yes.
Do you think we actually don't have that culture of wanting to build a business to sell? I mean, like you've said, we have seen from our parents and their parents, they're building businesses to pass on. And then people are building businesses to, walk around with knowing, I mean, that might be a sharaba. It's your problem. That big company there is mine. I've started the other one there. That one collapsed. I moved on. I moved on to this other one. The thing of, we don't treat businesses as commodities for sale. We treat businesses as children. We are bringing up the child. It becomes delinquent. And they approved kula kayuko. This one is good. We continue with this one. So I think we are talking about changing a mind shift, a mindset here of, I am starting a business looking at, I'm going to sell this business. And in fact, very many people that you talk to, they'll tell you, why the hell would I be wanting to do that? Start a business or sell it. I'm not a trader of businesses. I am a provider of services and solutions.
I'd say two things. First, culture is an evolution. I don't think culture is something. If there's something that's not static in life, it's culture. You look at how we lived and what were cultural norms of an average Kenyan in the 1960s, and you look at the cultural norms of an average Kenyan today, and there's been a shift in several things. And building a sellable business does not mean that you are going to sell it. It just gives you the option to sell it should you choose to, and should you want to. And choice is a good thing to have. If you have the choice and you can unlock, even those kids that you used as a very good example, they will leave your nest. They will marry someone, they will have their own offspring, and they will go and parent in a way that maybe borrows a bit from what you did and builds on things that they have learned in their lifetimes. And so if you're to take that example of your business being a child, then the same applies. They will choose someone, and they will marry, and they will grow and
So
develop.
selling a business, building a sellable business doesn't mean necessarily walking away from the business.
Not necessarily.
It's not selling and walking.
No,
So
no,
hii
not-
biashara ilikuwa yangu,
They're-
Leonard amenunua, I moved on, I started a new one.
You have many options of selling. You have walking away is an outright sale. Cut me a check, take 100% of the shares of the business, and I go. You could have a merger, a partial sale, but all those conversations are not open to you if you do not have the structures built to enable yourself to have a seat at that table where the conversations have been had.
Are we going to break?
Yes.
Why don't we go into that break?
Let's go to break. Right?
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
Conversation continues with Leonard Mudachi, a business acquisition, development, and growth strategist. We are talking about building sellable businesses. You start a business, you build a business, you put all your blood, sweat, and tears and everything else, including your family and reputation, into it. It grows. Now, do you get value out of it? Do you cash out? Do you continue growing? Do you bring in investors who now put in some more money and help you to grow the business? And some of that is basically giving you money because you are full owner of the business. Or do you sell off the company and then go and do something else? This was the business that was doing this. I move on into doing something else. Or do you sell off the company and just go and eat that money? Eat that money. You have basically worked hard. There are various such examples that we have, for example, in Kenya, of businesses that have grown. Let me read you an excerpt from a story a couple of years ago. The world's largest multinational cosmetics company, L'Oreal, has acquired Kenya's Interconsumer Products Limited, the makers of Nice and Lovely brands, in a multi-billion-dollar transaction. The founder of this company was called Peter Kinothia of Interconsumer. They said this has made Mr. Kinothia an instant multi-billionaire. He grew a business, brought it to a certain level. Multinational comes in, takes up the company, gives him money, he walks, and he puts it in other things here and there. There are very many other examples, I'm sure, that you can tell us, Leonard.
Yep, and probably built other businesses as a result, because I'm sure if you have not met him, not had the privilege of meeting Mr. Kinothia, but I'm sure he'll tell you that in his early days of setting up Interconsumer, access to capital was a challenge.
Yep.
Now he has this knowledge, he has this expertise of having built this business to a stage where it's sellable, and he does sell it. But with this knowledge now and capital, imagine what he can go on to do, because I'm sure he had other ideas. I cannot put hand to heart and say that I'm right, but I'm quite confident that he did build other businesses, which we see brands of in the market. Probably an easier task or a faster one than his first time around without sufficient capital to assist him.
How would you say the business atmosphere is faring in Kenya when it comes to businesses that you can, start off and then it be profitable with the option of, selling it off later? If you did an analysis of how businesses run, it doesn't matter at what level, your small enterprise to your, top of the range.
I think to answer that question, you have to look at the potential funders in the private equities and the venture capitals and ask yourself how many of them have chosen to set up shop in Nairobi, whether it's for Kenyan transaction or looking at the regions. And there are several. In fact, we are constantly in the first, second or third African country in terms of deals that are sought after in the market. So there is a lot of scope for growth and development of businesses in Kenya by virtue of the fact that you can see the capital coming to look for them. And the capital can find more businesses if we had businesses that are better structured.
There are those who argue that the majority of businesses in this country, some even go, when they give a percentage, they say something like 98% of our businesses fall into the category of what you call SMEs. Now, people who run SMEs run it so that they can make a living.
Yes.
Now, how then do you get people who are in that sector to get to a point where they realize that, yes, making a living is good. You don't have to wait for an accident or a force of nature to change things, but you can actually deliberately set in motion this process so that this thing that you're doing becomes a lot more than what it actually is. I'm saying this because if that value addition is added to the sector that has the largest number of people, I'm thinking of just how much more could be done and the impact it could have.
I think first, CT, we underestimate that title SME. We band it around, and it would be nice if you peg some numbers to that S and that M.
Yes.
Because I can guarantee you some of those M companies, if you were to get a glimpse into their annual turnover, you wouldn't see them as so M. They would actually come across as large because several of them have turnover in the billions of Kenya shillings, and that would put them at a monthly turnover of hundreds of millions. And so they are not as small as or as medium as they would, at least for where the market is. And that shows the opportunity. But also sometimes you're hunkering down to just do your thing in your small space and you don't appreciate, with just how much value you're adding to the economy and to the country. You're selling your product or you're selling your service and you're doing it diligently, but you don't have the time to step back and look and say, hey, where am I? Where do I sit in the context of things? And so when we talk about interesting things like East African community, growth of markets, if we do not build Kenyan businesses or East African businesses that are structured for that growth, we will sit back and watch as these opportunities are taken by others, on our soil. It would be great to see Kenyan companies grow and develop and build brands where you could walk into a restaurant that you love in DRC or a DRC restaurant that you love in Kenya and so on, because brands have been built to a level where they can grow and they do have the structure. So next time we are sitting here, hopefully we're talking about a example of a Kenyan business that grew from Kenya as a result of having structures and policies right, as opposed to Coca-Cola from Atlanta.
Strange you should say it. There was some work I was doing in the western part of Uganda, Mbarara to be specific. And at that point in time, you can be, to my amazement, they've heard me tell this story, that's why they're smiling.
Yes.
I found Nakumat. I said, Nakumat.
Where have I seen this before?
Yes. And then I found KCB. I said, hey, I found Equity.
Yes.
And I thought, now, strange, isn't it? I'm not saying there were not other banks, but
Yes.
But the Nakumat was the biggest supermarket there anyway.
Yes.
So when you say what you're saying, it makes sense.
A lot of sense. And I like those examples that you've used because they show us what is possible.
Yeah.
These are all Kenyan entities that started at some. And the three examples that you have given, KCB, Equity, and Nakumat, one is closed.
Yes.
Yeah. And two are still thriving and growing.
Yes.
Both Equity and KCB went into the DRC market and are looking and exploring other African markets. But marries with your conversation from last week, this thing is a dance of many things. It's not just one thing, So without the governance, Nakumat is no more. KCB, Equity have sufficient governance structures to help them grow, develop, identify opportunities. But there's also something that we miss out. Kenya is an extremely corporatized market. What I mean by that is that we have amazing corporate talent. If I was to take you back to Mbarara City and tell you that I want you to open a radio station, and you're not in where the sausage is made, you're at the front, but I'm sure you'd pick up the phone, and in a week or two you'd have a framework of a team. You'll assemble a team that's able to take you to Mbarara and start to contextualize this opportunity of what it would take to open a radio station there. So we could tap into this market. We do understand as a nation corporate structure, and we thus have an excellent platform to build and develop new businesses or existing businesses into sellable, scalable businesses.
So what is it that, there's the foreign capital that's coming in.
Yes.
All these PE funds and venture capital guys who are coming in and they have money. I'm seeing a story in the Financial Standard today saying 43 private capital deals that Kenya recorded in the first half of this year amounted to 104 billion shillings.
Yes.
Just in the first 6 months of 2022. And this is a lot. So the money is here, it's coming. Now there's money coming into the country. And there's that thing that you said earlier, if we are not prepared, then this money will just come and dance around and move away. So what is it that is lacking in terms of that preparation? Is it knowledge? Is it willingness? Is it support from government institutions? What is it that's lacking? And what needs to happen so we can quickly just taking all this money that's floating around Africa?
On your list of money that's available, don't forget local capital.
Yeah.
Because like in Kenya, we have excellent and large pension funds. We have large SACCOs they should also be participants in this conversation. But I think you just don't know what you don't know, until in my space of expertise, restaurants and hospitality, until a private equity transaction was done in 2012, none had been done before. Now, when it's done, they are also in the same market. They're like, hey, who did a deal in
So it
Kenya?
created a whole...
Then everyone's like, there's this kind of money to be made in this space, in this country. Then everyone starts looking. We're also trying to do a deal in the retail sector. And so that knowledge, which is available, we should seek to get. And business owners should seek to get advisory boards and structuring them, like Carol was talking about last week. That helps, because then you bring in minds that are exposed or that bridging the gaps in your knowledge, because you have developed knowledge that has great value in terms of the product or service that you're selling. But you may not know about transactions. You may not know who the potential buyers are. You may end up trying to do it yourself and not doing it as well as it can be done. But you operate in a market that has this talent available for you to either acquire. One thing I've learned over time is that any talent anywhere in the world is available to you at a fee. If you want to build a nuclear power plant today and you know nothing about nuclear power plants, you have the ability, if you have the resources, to acquire that talent and build your nuclear power plant. So that's what I'm saying. Can we look at that in the form of Kenya businesses so that we can grow them into entities that truly unlock value for the continent and its people?
And who would this we be? Business owners? Are we looking at a regulatory body who would say, okay, look, this is the way in which we ought to go? They can stand as an advisory. Who would we be?
The we, of course, would start with the entrepreneur, because the entrepreneur is the one who's taken a business from a certain level to something that is admirable enough to be considered for acquisition or to be considered for growth.
Yeah.
But we do have several speakers, Carol, you had last week, who are those professionals who exist and can now say, I want to do this. And you don't have a shortage of people to help you do that.
And I look at businesses, and I don't think we can run away from the reality that the majority of businesses are not necessarily... Okay, let me flip that.
Yeah.
The minority of businesses have been have started to provide a service or to fill a gap. Majority of them have been for survival.
Yes.
Let me start this business so I can have an extra coin in my pocket. Very few of them have been for, okay, there's this big gap. I think I can create or invent something to fill this. So essentially what we're asking in this process then is graduated learning in business. So you may have started your business as something. I hear you saying that, can we graduate to the point by where we're saying this has to be something more than just an extra shilling? It can go beyond then being profitable, whereby it's so attractive and so lucrative that somebody else may want to pick it up and then do what they want with it while I go and start something else. So do we move from survival when businesses are being open? I mean, look at COVID period. How many businesses opened in those 2 years in order for people to survive?
Yep. Yep.
So how many were really for sustainability?
So, time. Where a business has a lifespan. And in that lifespan, there various people are at various levels with their company. Not everyone, not every single business in the Kenyan market today can come and decide that we want to sell or we want to be sold, because they may not be in the space where they are performing well enough to do so. But some are, and more will be tomorrow. Yeah, and in that same lifespan, some will choose not to, some will close, more will open. So in that cycle, I like what the term you used about a constant acquisition of knowledge, because different companies at different stages in their life require different skill sets. You have a company with one store. You know, you don't need a board for what? to tell you what, you can be everything and do everything. But when you move from 1 to 5 and then from 5 to 15 stores, now the metrics of what that company does have changed slightly. You know, when there were 1 or 2, you could wake up in the morning and say, I'll spend 3 hours at this store and then another 3 hours. So my presence is felt daily. But when they move to 5, all of a sudden that becomes a bit of a stretch.
Yeah.
You know, it's an hour. You're missing some things. And then they move to 10 and you realize, oh, hold on. I was the system, but now I need to give way to another system that enables me to have the same oversight of this business, but is not dependent on me as an individual.
You know, you mentioned pension funds. Huh?
Yes.
One hears of the mention a great deal when one talks about equity, one talks about funding and resources from the West.
Yes.
I have 2 questions. How exactly do pension funds contribute to this activity? I mean, what role do they play? I know they have, most of the time they have money sitting there. How do they play the role? SACCOs, I understand. You go there, you borrow. Pension fund, they've come into it. I'm told you can even buy a house if you have a pension. You can do all sorts of things. But how, when it comes to investment, specifically investment, where you want to go into a business beyond just buying a house, how do pension funds?
If you do your research on the Kenyan pension scene, you'll recognize that the Kenyan pension funds are already significant investors in multiple sectors of the economy, either through the stock exchange because they are trading in stock. They are heavily regulated, so they have to follow certain regulations that are set for them. But they're already significant investors. If you look at the banks, which have some of the largest pension funds in the country, and look at the commercial real estate assets that they own in this country, they are significant and they continue. I mean, the CBK pension funds has just opened a new, very interestingly shaped building in the CBD in Nairobi. So they are participating. But can we now stretch this out? Because I know that as an asset class, equity in businesses has been allowed. I don't know to what percentages, but you still see more of the participation being foreign than local. There is an opportunity to tap into that local capital to take advantage of some of these opportunities. You
know, the reason why I ask this question is because every once in a while one comes across something that falls the category of an advisory. You find a huge funding company, say like in the West, like Stanley Morgan, or is it Morgan Stanley?
Morgan Stanley, yeah.
Okay.
Those two together.
Stanley and Morgan.
Exactly.
Okay? Yeah, so who comes before the other?
It's all right.
Yes, okay. And you read of an advisory about investing in a country like ours.
Yes.
And the issues that we have. How seriously do such advisories impact on the monies that actually eventually find their way here in the form of investments?
I say that people listen to their people, and people are comfortable with their people. So you're a Kenyan sitting here, and a Morgan Stanley investment banker issues an advisory against you, for example, and chances are he was in school with the chief executive of the fund that wants to put in the money, and he can pick up the phone and say, hey, this advisory, tell me more, you know? And I think one of the things that we are missing out on is the power and the value of local context. Even our knowledge has value, yeah? We are seeing now in the market the realities of foreigners coming into the market and ignoring local context, yeah, and intellect, and struggling.
To their great detriment.
To their great detriment. I mean, one of the stories, if you picked an example of how many funds have been have invested in the last 6 months, but there have been stories circulating about how many investors have been here for a year and opted out, and burnt their fingers.
Yep.
A lot of that is to do with local context, because the reality is there are some things, and you have sat in those rooms, there are some things that are said, we need to start talking about Africa from the prism of Africans. So even we, with our capital from our pensions, investing in our businesses and growing and developing them, look at some of the local brands. And Kenyans are very, very good at this. I mean, on the African continent, we are great at putting together brands that are local, yet are performing to an international standard. You see it in the restaurant space, you see it in the retail space. And those are exportable brands and scalable brands. So what happens if we could do this more? If we could capitalize them better, if we could give them the knowledge that was lacking, that they need, that can enhance their growth and development.
Leonard, you've been chairman. Are you still chairman of the retail
Yes, I
trade?
am. Yes,
You're
I
still
am.
chairman.
Yes, I am.
Of the Retail Trade Association of Kenya.
Yeah.
That brings together all the retailers, from the big supermarkets to all the other outlets to food outlets. You're also in the restaurant business.
Yes.
For many years. So how do you give this kind of knowledge to the players in just your industry alone? Because there's potential for growth there.
I mean, our players, if I was to use Retrack as an example, I think they're living it. They're living exactly what I speak to. Because there are some phenomenal African brands, Kenyan brands, let me say, not African, that are growing in this market. Take players like Optica. Optica is a world-class spectacles and eyewear store, and you walk into a store, or take people like City Walk, or take brands like Healthy You, and not necessarily the big supermarkets that you see, but others. Yeah, the supermarkets are there also, and even take the supermarkets. We have been great at very few African markets do you walk into and see international standard local brands that have grown. Quickmart, Naivas, all local. Carrefour is a foreign brand, but it's one in a pool of several well-executed local brands. Look at our banking sector. I grew up in Kenya where the top banks were foreign.
Yep.
Now, the top 5 banks are all local, built with local talent. So what does it look like if you extend this investment in local context and local intellect to wider sectors of the economy? I think it could be phenomenal.
Big things. Thank you very much for joining us today and for sharing all this knowledge that you have.
Thank you.
Coming.